Father, I'm so excited to be giving this message, but Lord, I pray it be clear. It's something that I have wrestled with, Lord, not because I don't understand it, but I'm trying to understand it better. Just help me now, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
We'll see how long I do this series for. So, as some of you know, during COVID, I was studying judgment. Long story short, don't want to bore you with all this right now because I have other things to get to, is that I learned some things about judgment. A year later, we looked at Revelation, and I was surprised by things I'd learned in the Old Testament. I've taken Revelation before, I've taught it before, which really opened my eyes in some ways. And one of my pet peeves is becoming believers who are like, yeah, Revelation's interesting, but they do not see it, and by the way, I was this way myself, as relevant to their life. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to take Revelation and answer biblical questions that a lot of believers struggle with from Revelation. Say, Pastor, do you understand everything in Revelation? Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, one time Chip Baldwin came to me and goes, what's this all about? I'm like, Chip, that's a really good question. I've read stuff on it. I said, I have no idea what that means. I was being serious. I wasn't being smart. So here we go. So the sermon title is, for today, how do I know I'm a real Christian? I almost didn't do this one because I think in some ways I feel like I've been doing this off and on, but I'm still going to do it anyway because it's a good introductory. Go ahead, guys. So at times in my life, I've been challenged with a simple yet puzzling question. Am I a true follower of Christ? Let me give you a little background really quick. When I was younger, the Lord gave me several opportunities. He gives all of us. The Lord gives all of us opportunities. You may not realize it, but all of your lives happen for a reason, the good and the bad. And the Lord gave me opportunities in my life. They may have been different for yours, but they were what I needed. So in my life, I was raised in a Christian home. I was taken to church every time the doors were open and stuff. I went to Christian school. So I learned a lot. We read the Bible every night as a family. So I learned a lot about the Bible and God. And I went to Christian camp, worked as a counselor. This isn't me bragging. It leads into this very nicely here. And as a teenager, I was working on what my theology was, what I thought about things. I didn't always agree with my pastor or my church. Didn't mean I didn't like them. I just wasn't always sure what I thought about certain things. But one example of, to lead into this, I was working at, it's not there anymore, Albi's Big Boy, near Buffalo Road in Erie, Pennsylvania. And there was an adult lady in her 20s. I was a teenager. And she came running back and she was all upset. She's a brand new Christian, only been saved for 5 months. Brand new Christian. She was so upset. Maybe you've heard me tell this story before. And she was very upset because she was having a debate with some Christians in the restaurant about eternal security, and they had, and I came out, one of them was a waiter at a restaurant, his family came in a lot. I didn't know him real well. And remember, I was a teenager, she was the adult, came up to the table and said, hey, I said, next time you want to talk about theology, you come look me up. Don't you pick on some new Christian. Don't pick on some, she was a Baptist like me. I said, hey. We became fast friends. James Hilliard was his name. He was a Pentecostal trying to become a preacher. We became really good friends after that conversation. And we would often talk about our differences in theology stuff. I bring this up because when I was a teenager, despite the fact that I was figuring some things out and stuff, am I truly a follower of Christ? I was at church for Sunday night. We were at a plaza. North Harbor Baptist at that point was just in a storefront. And so my dad had taken us there because he wanted to help plant this church. There were 2 rows of very functional chairs. I don't even remember if we had a very good sign in the window. And I'm sitting there and Pastor Jones is up front. And by the way, what I'm about to share does not suggest he's a bad pastor. He's a Pharisee. That's not the point. He said, I want to tell you about 5 things about the Pharisees. Okay. So I'm listening. And he went through them. And I remember at one point my head shot up. I thought, oh my word, if you didn't preference anything he just said, I would think he was talking about a Baptist in our church. And that scared me. I thought, oh my word. I thought, do you understand? All of a sudden I'm like, wait, could I be a Pharisee? This isn't that my pastor was a Pharisee or that he was, it was just a realization There were, we look at Pharisees as they were Jesus' biggest enemies. Am I an enemy of Christ? And then as I got older, I don't care if you're a Democrat or independent. That's not why I'm sharing this. I happened to join the Republican Party as a young 20-something. And suddenly people were like, oh, if you're a Republican, Jesus wouldn't like you because Republicans hate poor people. Oh. And so there it was again. My Christianity was being questioned once again. Am I truly a follower of Christ? Do you understand? Some people even today are like, you don't know Christ. If Christ was here, he'd hate you. Maybe you've heard that. I've heard that. And then I wrote my book on whether boys should be allowed to compete in girls' sports or not. I'm a boys and girls track coach, and I said no. And I have a person I know who works in academia. And I know she doesn't agree with what I think about things. I said, do me a favor. Would you please read this and rip it apart? I want someone who's not an ally to rip this apart. She wouldn't even read it. But she kept on assuming she knew it was in it. We were talking back and forth on Facebook, and I kept saying to her, this would be so much simpler if you just read the book. Just read the book, and then you can rip it apart. And finally, she brought up my Christianity. I said, look, if I wrote this as a pastor, this book would be super short. I wasn't a real Christian. I was a Pharisee. These are her words. I was just a Pharisee. She knew real Christians, and I wasn't one of them. I've heard this before from other people, too. Now, you could just blow that off if you want. But how do you know? How do you know? I've even had people in church leadership sometimes. I'm just wondering if I'm doing the right thing here. I'm just wondering if Jesus is really pleased with anything I'm doing. Brother and sister. So the question is, how do you know? We're going to use Revelation. We're going to use the future to show you whether you're a good Christian or not, what your status is. So how are you going to do that? Well, go ahead. We have to know. It's simple. We have to understand the basic laws. I think prophecy, maybe judgment. I'm still worrying about what I should call it. Go ahead. There are 3 rules. These rules will help you out a lot with very simple rules, but they'll help you out a lot with prophecy. Rule number 1. Apostasy, the big word for falling away from Christ, always precipitates judgment. That sounds so unimportant, but it's very important. And when you're apostate, you're actually following Satan. 1 Timothy 5, 13 through 15 is talking about women who have nothing to do, and so they start to gossip. And this is what the text says. And it says they have begun to follow after Satan. If you're not following Christ, then you are following Satan. Do you understand? There is no middle ground. It's not like, oh, well, I'm just kind of not up to it. No, you're the fool. That's why, have you ever wondered why Jesus said to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan? Like, oh my word. All he is saying is that Peter, at that moment, is following Satan. That's all that's happening there. That's all that's happening there. Get thee behind me, Satan. Okay. So, that doesn't sound important, but it's really important. Okay? So basically, if you're not following Jesus, you're following Satan. And anytime there's judgment, it means you've fallen away from Jesus. Okay, number 2. Satan, I know this sounds so simple. Satan is the polar opposite of God. In other words, if God is the equator, Satan is Antarctica. If God is 12 noon, then Satan is 12 midnight. Do you see what I mean? It's not a middle ground. It's not like, well, Satan's kind of different from God. No. They are polar opposites. That's critical to understanding a lot of revelation and prophetic passages. 3. This doesn't sound important, but it's critical. Satan likes to imitate God. Now, sometimes he does for practical reasons. Sometimes he does because he wants his deceptions to be bought. But these 3 things are going to help us answer this question today. Go ahead. Now, before I dive into my text, I realized something this morning because I watched my wife type in my outline. I thought, I'm missing something. I could tell by her expression. I thought, I'm missing something here. And what I do not put on the outline, I'm going to give it to you real quick, I'm not going to spend really long, is why this text, why the other text that I choose. When you have a theory, you have to have a hypothesis. Right? So here's my hypothesis. I'm going to try to prove it for you. The hypothesis is this. If you want to know that you are a follower of Christ, you need to look no further in Revelation to the satanic church of the future. You should be the exact opposite of them. Whatever they are, you should be the opposite. Satan, rule 2. Whatever Satan is, God is the polar opposite. So if we look at Satan's church, we should be the exact opposite. of what you say, well, that sounds good in practice, but how does that work? Okay, it's a starting point, okay? So that's hypothesis. Now, 1 Timothy 3:15, which David did a great job of reading and talking about, 3:15 for 4:2, it's going to have all three laws, and what this is talking about, in my humble opinion, is the formation before the rapture, the beginnings of Satan's church. See, Satan is a thief and he's a liar. Satan's not going to build his church, he's going to steal it. Satan never builds it, he just steals, okay? So let's look at the passage David did a great job of reading. 1 Timothy 3, we're going to reread it, 3:15 and on. It says, "But if I tarry long, thou mayest know how thou oughtest to behave thyself, house of God, which search the living God, the pillar of the ground of truth. Without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness." I'm going to skip ahead for time's sake. 4:1. "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their consciences seared with a hot iron." All three of these principles are in this text. Let's back up. 4:1. "The Spirit speaking expressly, in the latter times some shall..." Josh, I'm going to work you out this morning. Can you back up to the three laws? "Some shall depart from the faith." Remember I told you three things about judgment. Apostasy always has to be there. They are leaving Jesus. Do you understand that? They're departing. So we know that these people are leaving the faith. Okay, there's no middle ground here. Okay, so now if we know there's apostasy, we should see polar opposites, and we do. In 15, it said, what about the church? It was the ground of truth. 4:2, what do we find out about these people leaving the faith under doctrines of demons? They are speaking lies. Truth and lies are polar opposites. They're not the same. Okay? Okay. So we see that. And 3, and I think this is later, but be patient. I think this is later too, so I got this skim by it. Josh, you are a soldier. Satan likes to imitate God. It says, and this is subtle, it says our conscience has been seared with hot iron. You see, your conscience tells you what's right and wrong. That's what your conscience tries to do for you. So if you have been deceived and you're doing what's wrong, you either have the choice of repenting or destroying your conscience. You don't have a middle. So if you're going to imitate, if you're going to claim to know truth, and you're going to claim to tell Christians they don't know what they're talking about, you have to destroy your conscience. Because you're just speaking lies.